Thank you, Mike. Well, good morning, everyone. So good to see you here. With this being the last day of the year, New Year's and all that, I wasn't sure there'd be anybody here to listen to my lesson, but it's so good to have you here. The lights have been dimmed, so sit back, enjoy your nap, I suppose. Blankets I heard were being passed out. They didn't offer me one, I noticed. But I got a problem here. I can't see. There we go. There's a light. Let there be light, folks. There we are. The sermon today is going to be on a topic that's near and dear to my heart. Many of you know that I am an amateur astronomer, amateur astrophotographer. I am a professional scientist, but one of my passions, and my family would say it's really an obsession, is astronomy and astrophotography. I love so much looking at pictures of the night sky, looking through telescopes. But I wanted to bring this up because with astronomy being in many ways the first science, one of the earliest sciences ever, it is all throughout the Bible, and there are so many astronomical aspects seen in the Bible, but also some points that I think we can make that I don't have to make, but the Bible authors themselves made, in which we have the idea of light and darkness, God and his cosmos. Now, there's a lot of ground to cover here to talk about the universe as a whole, but I'll do my best to get through all of this. I'm beginning with this picture here. I even have a high-powered laser pointer here. If I don't burn a hole in the screen, we can talk about this. But here, of course, is a picture of the Earth as seen as someone's orbiting the moon. In fact, this is the first picture of this kind ever taken. This is December the 24th. Christmas Eve, 1968, from Apollo 8, the first men to go around the backside of the moon, and they saw what's called Earth rise from Apollo 8. Remarkably, they read from Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 through 10, when they were doing this. It was broadcast on television. Of course, I can't imagine this being allowed today, but this is what they did. I think it's a wonderful choice. What do we read when we first open our books, our Bibles? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep. And the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. God saw the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. From the power of God's own word, from the power of creation, by the spoken word, of course, he created all things. He said, "Let there be light." He, in many ways, was the first, not just the creator of all things, that created these things. He was, in many ways, the first observer, wasn't he? What did he say? He said the light was good. The light was good. Well, he also went on in Genesis chapter 1, and we start there in verse 16. He says there, "And God made two great lights, the greater light to govern the day and the lesser light to govern the night. He made the stars also." Well, so what do we see here? God creates the heavens. He creates the things such as the stars. This is from Hubble Space Telescope, this great cluster of stars in the constellation Hercules, thousands of stars that are clumped together, really forming a ball of stars, that they're gravitationally connected to one another. These beautiful colors of blues and reds and yellows that we see here. And again, what did God say? He saw that it was good. The first observer, it was good. His reasons for doing this, perhaps we don't quite know yet, but we understand as the Bible unfolds very quickly, he creates man, and he creates man to be the steward of all that he created. And he creates man in such a way that man would know him and seek after him and worship him and love him. And he would love man as well as his child. And that this is why he did it. And it says that right in Genesis, the reasons for it. He made the sun, of course. Here it is in the ultraviolet light from NASA. And here is the full moon. I think I just picked this off of Wikipedia. These things that govern the day for us and the night. The sun, of course, gives us our warmth, gives us our gravity, keeps the earth stable, and gives us life. when we think about at least the material explanations for that. But God made all these things for us because of that. So God did all this. So why am I so interested in astronomy? It really goes back to when I was a very small child. I do not remember not being interested in astronomy. My father was a professor of astronomy and physics at our local university. He had books and things laying around, so I'm sure I was exposed from the very beginning to these pictures that I loved, and I wanted to be able to continue with this. I would look through telescopes, and then I began to get into astrophotography. Here's one of my earlier pictures I took of the central part of a beautiful nebula, the Heart Nebula it's called, and the structure that you see here is called Melot 15. Beautiful area where stars have died, but are now new stars are being reborn in these clouds that we see here. Now, as I said, I began when I was very young, but about 20 years ago was about when you think of when digital photography was getting to be more common, and they started to make cameras that were particularly formed for the purposes of astronomy. They're cooled down a little bit so that they keep what's called the thermal light, the thermal photons from infiltrating. And you could take pictures, very long exposure pictures, of things like nebula, like I show here, but my main interest is in galaxies, and I'll have a few of those in just a moment. I can share my pictures with family and friends. That's one of my chief motivations. I found that sharing my professional work, which is in quantum physics and in mathematical calculations, doesn't really seem to interest people as much. They don't really want to get into that with me. But they do tend to really like the astronomy, and practically everybody I've ever met wants to talk about something about astronomy, wants to see, maybe asking me, hey, did you see that thing in the night sky the other night? What was that? And almost everybody has that interest. I think about many things about how the astronomy that I like very much as a kind of indirect evidence of God. I'm doing a class right now with the girls down in the classroom before services on Sundays, when we're looking at some of the evidences. Well, why should I believe in the Bible? Why should I believe in God? One of the arguments for God is called the cosmological argument. And it goes like this, and that is that we look at the vastness of the universe, we look at all these things. Anything that is created must have a beginning, must have a creator, and that creator himself needs to be outside of that thing which is created. So one way to look at that is that the things that I study in my professional world, the things that I enjoy in my private life, in my hobby of astronomy, these are material things. It's the material universe. I enjoy that immensely. I enjoy learning about it. But God is above and beyond that which is material. He's the creator of all of those material things, but he himself, spiritual, is beyond that. And David spoke of that. He said, the heavens are telling of the glory of God, and their expanse is declaring the work of his hands. Psalm 19, verse 1. Day to day pours forth speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words. Their voice is not heard. Their line has gone out through all the earth, and their utterances to the end of the world. In them he has placed a tent for the sun, which is a bridegroom coming out of his chamber. It rejoices as a strong man to run his course. Its rising is from one end of the heavens, and its circuit to the other end of them, and there is nothing hidden from its heat. So there's a kind of utterance and words that are being said here by God that are not really words or speech, but indirectly we are seeing God himself. We see his thumbprint. The artist has had a black canopy, very much like a tent that's stretched out above us, in which he has painted the brightness of stars, and then later we learn the brightness of galaxies, nebula up there, that I now have the pleasure of photographing. That's what I think of in these things. And yet, I have another thought when I look at these things. I hardly have a night go by I don't think of God's majesty in regards to his creation and in what he's telling us about himself when I look at these things. But there's a little bit to that as well. Here are some of my galaxies. There's some earlier pictures I took. These are Messier cataloged. The M number means Charles Messier, who was a French astronomer, I think in the 1700s, who was he was one of the first to discover these blobs. And he thought they were nebula, that were just gases within our own region of space. There wasn't a concept yet of a galaxy, of a universe beyond that. But these are the Messier that we now know are these galaxies quite far away. They're going to be tens of millions of light years away. Now, remember, a light year is a distance, so that gives you an idea of the vastness of how far these are. And they're considered near neighbors of ours. The fact that I can photograph them from my backyard in Federal Way is pretty amazing. But these are these beautiful galaxies. I ask myself this other question: who am I in this vast universe? How could I possibly be anything, worth anything, when I consider just how mind-bogglingly big the universe is, and then how far away these objects are that I'm looking at, and how big they are. And all those stars that are in them, there's probably hundreds of billions of stars in each of these galaxies you see here. Maybe 1 trillion if they're larger galaxies. And I think to myself, who am I? And then it dawns on me, that sounds familiar. Who am I in regard to this universe? And then it dawns on me, oh yes, Psalm 8. David, long ago, was asking that very same question, and yet he provides us an answer to that. O Lord, how majestic is your name in all the earth, who have displayed your splendor above the heavens. And he goes on to say in verse 3, when I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have ordained, what is man that you take thought of him, and the son of man that you care for him? Yet you have made him a little lower than God, and you crown him with glory and majesty. David understands that although he is so small and insignificant, God has made him great. God has bestowed on him this glory and this honor, as he has on me, as he has on you as well. And that it doesn't matter how small we are compared to the vastness of the universe, God singles us out. He knows us. He wants us to know that he loves us, and that he is looking at us then for our obedience to him. The obedience, of course, we learn through his direct revelation, which is his word. That same word that created is the same word that saves us today. And so let's turn to a little bit about astronomy in the Bible, spend a few minutes on this. If you'll indulge me, I'll start to carry us through a little bit of a history of astronomy, but my family reminds me this is not going to be an astronomy lecture. This is a Bible sermon, so I'll do my best, but please, if you'll indulge me, let me go through this. I promise you there's a biblical spiritual point, but it will come later. This is the canopy of the heavens. Again, that tent outstretched above us. And in fact, this is what the sky will look like tonight. That is, if you are in a place where you can see stars tonight. It's going to be pretty cloudy. But this is 1 minute to midnight tonight, New Year's. And I don't know how much of this you can see. Let me get my laser weapon out here. Oh, I misplaced it. Here it is. I want to point out a couple of things. You might have already spotted Orion right here. That's Orion constellation. Easy one. Here is Canis Major, the dog constellation. Sirius, the dog star. That's the moon. It's in a waning gibbous phase. Here's Leo, the lion I spot. Here's Gemini, the twins. And over here, I want to pay attention. This is Taurus, the bull, but over here is the Pleiades. These are the legs sticking out at the top here of Ursa Major, the Great Bear. Also, the Big Dipper is in there. Unfortunately, that's not you wouldn't be able to see that in the sky. It'd be really low on the horizon, and you probably won't be able to see it. I mention all that because we're going to talk about that from Job in just a moment. But we look at this and we think, what a beautiful canopy we have to look at. Light punctuated in the darkness, so to speak. Isaiah chapter 40 says, it is he who sits above the earth, the circle of the earth, stretches out the heaven like a curtain, spreads them out like a tent to dwell in. There's always that concept of the tent, that canopy that's being put out here. Really interesting to see that. Let's talk about Job here. I like this picture, this drawing, a sketching of Job. Obviously, this is Job. He's covered in scars and boils. And here are his 3 friends, and they're sitting around. And what they're doing is they're spending chapter after chapter trying to outdo the other on his rhetoric, on telling about how wise he is, but then really trying to get Job to confess, what did you do to deserve this? You must have done something awful. You must have done some terrible sin. You need to fess up to it so you can then move on. And of course, Job is insistent, I didn't do anything to deserve what happened to me. But there's so much in that rhetoric. They're talking about astronomical things. Some of them, for example, in Job 38 and 31, these are some of the verses that I wanted to mention. Here he says, can you bind the chains of the Pleiades or loose the cords of Orion? Can you lead forth a constellation in its season and guide the bear with her satellites? Do you know the ordinances of the heavens or fix their rule of the earth? I always imagine them talking, a lot of this discussion happening at night when they are looking at the canopy of the heavens and they're seeing perhaps Orion constellation, the Pleiades, the great bear in the sky as well. And then I'm not sure what they're referring to with its satellites. This could well be other constellations around it. I doubt seriously they're talking about M51, the Whirlpool Galaxy. They wouldn't be able to see that. But nevertheless, they are seeing this canopy up there, and they know God did that. They have no control over those placement of those stars. They were not the ones to do that. God was. And they're using that as an example of the greatness of God. Here are the Pleiades, by the way, as seen from, I believe this is the NASA photograph from Hubble. And it still has some of its gases around it where these stars have formed. Very popular thing to look at. They call it the Seven Sisters, but you'll see there's actually a lot more than seven there. But if you have good eyesight, you can see seven. Some people say they can see more than that. Moving on then, you talk about Orion. Here's a beautiful picture that someone made of the Orion constellation. You can now see there's the hourglass figure of that in the belt and the sword. But he did this with a special filter, hydrogen alpha filter, which allows him to pull out some of these colors of this great arc of hydrogen gas around it. Just beautiful to see that. And of course, if we look even further, we see the wonder of what's there in Orion. For example, there's the Horsehead Nebula and also the Flame Nebula, which is very popular to photograph. These are not mine, by the way. I'm trying to cite the people that did the photographs. If there's no name on there, it's probably mine, unless I forgot. But this, to give you an orientation, that star there is the lower left star right there in the belt. There's the Horsehead, but then here's the Horsehead as seen from the Hubble Space Telescope. Getting closer and closer, just a beautiful picture. Again, this is mostly shadowing light behind it, but also getting some reflective light and new stars being formed. But the great thing of all, if we turn back, there's the Horsehead, which is right there. This is the Orion Nebula, which I'll show next. Just a beautiful nebula, huge expansive area, not that far away, in which we have these stars being formed out of the rubble, so to speak, of an old dead star. I should point out there was some Betelgeuse or Betelgeuse, which is right there, that red giant, was in the news because it dimmed inexplicably, and people were wondering, is it going to go supernova? Will we see a supernova? I was kind of hoping it would. It'd be neat to see. It didn't. It stabilized. It probably was just dust and stuff in front of it, blocking our view, and then the dust went away. So that's what happened there. All right, well, moving on then, I want to get a little bit now into one more question. This is one my dad and I have talked about, that you look at Job in particular, in which there's all this talk about astronomy, and really wondering, why is Polaris, the North Star, never in the Bible? And then it doesn't take much investigation to realize that at the time of Job, there was no obvious pole star. There is precession, and that is that we know that if we look at the night sky, we know that there's Polaris there in the middle, and the stars appear to be rotating around Polaris. In fact, they go on a counterclockwise motion like I'm indicating. And the question is, why in the Bible, particularly in Job 26:7, he stretches out the north over an empty space and hangs the earth on nothing? And it could well be that they're talking about that spot in the sky right there, and the idea that that's where the tent pole would be that's holding the canopy. Why is there nothing there? It's black. Well, we look at it today and we see Polaris, and we use Polaris to give us a guide as to which way is north. Well, the answer to that is precession, and that it's been known since really antiquity it's been known since early years anyway, not since antiquity, that there's precession and that whatever direction that axis is pointed is doing a kind of a circle like this, but it's doing it over a very long period of time. However, I can say that I have actually observed this precession in a very particular way. This object up here is a picture of my smaller mount, the base of it, and there's some knobs here. That's called an azimuth knob, and that controls the direction laterally like this. And this is called the altitude knob in the back, and that controls this direction. And what I'm wanting to do is I'm wanting this axis here to be pointed at the North Celestial Pole, which is almost where the North Star is. There's a little telescope I use, which is affixed here. There's a prism so I can look down it, and it turns the image on a right angle. Now, if I didn't have that prism, I'd have to look up, and I would crook my neck, and I would be sore all the time. So I was so glad when they came out with this right angle thing. But this is what I see. There's a reticle in there on a piece of glass. That little yellow dot there is telling me where should I move my knobs of my azimuth and altitude to place Polaris. I put it on this polar grid here. And it turns out that there's some years here. You'll see 2010 all the way to 2040. As the years go on, where I put Polaris in this grid, depending on the time and the date, that has shifted. I'm now putting it here in the middle because I'm into the 2020s now. I'm right in the middle of that grid. That's precession. It's just so cool to think of this effect that really should be taking thousands of years. I'm able to observe in the 20 years I've been doing this. I just think that's really cool. But anyway, you go back about 3,000 or 4,000 years ago to the time of Job, there's no obvious Polaris. There's no mention of Polaris as a pole star until about 1,000 years ago. Because up until that point, it had not moved. Now, it's not Polaris moving. It's actually that point in the sky around which the Earth rotates. That is moving just enough that it's not all that obvious. Anyway, pretty cool. It was really my dad that turned me on to that, to think this could well be an explanation of that verse. But let me go through a few things here in the time we have remaining. The geocentric universe is really the first model of how does this all work. The Earth is in the center of all things. This makes perfect sense. We see the sky come in the east, set in the west. We see the sun, the moon, everything else seems to be going around the earth. That seems to make perfect sense. And in fact, it was Ptolemy who even mathematically, back in I think the 2nd century AD, who formulated how this all was put together. And I don't know how well you can see this, but he has a map here of all these heavenly bodies that we now call the solar system and how they're in these circular orbits around the earth. Well, we also see that from the Bible because this was the understanding of that age, that the sun rises and the sun sets, and hastening to its place, it rises there again. We still say that. We still mark the time. When will sun rise tomorrow? When will the sun set tomorrow? The first picture I showed you was called Earth Rise. Well, the Earth wasn't rising. That was a spaceship going around the moon, and the moon goes around the Earth. But we all understand that. And so, in a sense, poetically, we say Earth rise, and we say the same thing. And really, this held sway for a good 1,500 years until we come to the time of Nicholas Copernicus, and around the middle of the 1500s, about a year after he died, this was published on his behalf, the model of a heliocentric universe. Now, this idea had been kicked around a while. That's a sun-centered universe. Now, this places the sun in the middle, and the inner planets correctly as Mercury and Venus. Here's the Earth, here's the Moon, Mars, Saturn, and then this is not Uranus. I forget what that is here. I don't think he had knowledge he may not have had knowledge of the universe. Yeah, Uranus then. But anyway, the bottom line is that there are all these perfect circles that he formed, and a circle within a circle for the moon. It's getting a lot closer to the concept of what we understand now from our science books. Now, he did this a year after he had died. Part of it was he knew that this would cause a lot of ruckus with the Catholic Church. He did not have a telescope in his day. That wasn't invented yet. He had a cross staff here, which is a long staff that he would point to a star, and he would measure its location at a particular time of night. And here again is his diagram, which I think is the same one we see here. Now, this is the way that things were, but somewhat quietly. It's interesting that in the Protestant churches, they actually were more accepting of the change to a heliocentric universe, mainly because they understood that change is inevitable, and they were doing a lot of changes too. They're going back to the sources of the Bible. They were changing up all this doctrine and dogma of the Catholic Church. And so this wasn't as much of a controversy, but it very much was with the Catholics when Galileo came along. He wasn't the inventor of the telescope. He perfected it. He showed the Pope and many of his cardinals and the church officials the phases of Venus, that it had phases just like the moon. It's closer to the sun than we are. He said, here's Mars. These look like canals on Mars. He thought they were actual canals. But the main thing is he looked at Jupiter. The planet Jupiter had these satellites that appeared to be going around, changing every night. And he realized they are in orbit. They're doing circles around that, just like Copernicus's model of the sun and everything to come. I wanted to show you this now. Now let's move ahead to today. This is a friend of mine who's in Australia, and he does planetary imaging. I'm not into that. I may someday, but I don't have the right equipment for it. And he stitched together this really neat video, which is showing, at one point, all four of the moons of Jupiter, the major moons of Jupiter, are shown here. We call them the Galilean moons. But he's able to pick up not just the moons passing in front of Jupiter here, but also their shadows illuminated, and one of the moons passing behind the shadow of another. And it's just amazing that he's able to do this from the Earth, that he's able to see that. But this is not any detail, of course, that Galileo would have seen, but he saw that model and he moved on. Well, the model continued to change because I'm skipping a bunch of centuries now. We get to Edwin Hubble, and he's looking through these humongous telescope. This one's 2.5 meters across. Mount Wilson Observatory, the Hooker telescope. Here he is looking at it. He's up on a platform way up here towards the top. This is where the eyepiece would be. And over time he realized that he's looking at galaxies. They're not within our own galaxy. There are many galaxies out there, but the main thing he realized over time was the universe is expanding. It's getting larger. It's moving. Things are mostly moving away from each other. He looked at this galaxy here, and this is my picture, not his. This is the Milky Way galaxy, which is our closest large neighbor. And I know Paul's spoken about it several times from the pulpit recently. But he realized that's another galaxy, and that our galaxy actually looks probably very similar to it. And that this particular one's close, it's hurtling towards us, but the distance is astounding. The number of stars there, I think this one has about 1 trillion in it. And so he opened up not just this idea of the sun with the planets around it, nor the stars around it, but that there's galaxies and more galaxies, galaxies upon galaxies, and they're moving away from each other by and large. The Hubble Space Telescope was named after him. One of the first things they did was point it to a patch of sky, which we thought was completely dark, nothing there. It's filled with galaxies, beautiful colors. And then looking at a cluster of galaxies, not only that, there are galaxies behind it, and that this cluster of galaxies we see in the foreground is acting like a lens. And there's an effect here called gravitational lensing, causing the more distant galaxies, the light from those, to actually warp around the cluster so that they appear to be distorted as a smear. This concept was first thought up as usual by Albert Einstein, and then an astronomer named Eddington was the first to observe it. Now there's even some spots, I've been told, if I can find them, that I could even photograph from my own telescope to see this gravitational lensing. One last picture along this line. Here is a map, you might say, of the visible universe. Now, Paul talked about this recently as well. According to the science, they say it's like 91 billion kilometers across. I cannot fathom how big that is. I was going to put down how many zeros that would be in miles, and I stopped. I just didn't want to put that up there. It's just astounding. Each of these points you see is not a star, but it's actually the globe of the sky, the whole globe of the sky around the Earth that we would see. Each of these points is a galaxy in that direction. It comes from this survey done, the 2-mass collaboration is called. I think it was headed by the University of Massachusetts, is why it's called that. And then you can kind of pick out that the galaxies mostly follow tendrils here along, and that if you spot it, our own galaxy is seen kind of along the center here, because this is depicting that we're looking outside of our galaxy, and what do we see? That's astounding to think about. Okay, I went through all of that, and I promised you there'd be a point. So here comes the point. And that is that what about God and his cosmos? Where did he go? Well, I started out with some scriptures. We were talking about the expanse of the heavens and the canopy. Where did he go? Well, I want to talk a little bit about that, because I think it's a great lesson here, one that I've gone over with my daughters quite a bit, and that is that I have been focusing the last many slides here on the materialist explanation of the universe. This is what was measured, observed, and what then has been put together and somewhat through a little bit of philosophy, but a lot of logic, and now has been confirmed through observations and measurements, that this model that we first have of the earth in the middle is displaced by the sun in the middle, is displaced with now a galaxy in which the sun's going around the center of a galaxy, which is now displaced that the galaxy is not in itself anything particularly special, and that it's a whole galaxy depicted, a whole universe depicted here of galaxies. Where is God in all of that? That's the material explanation. But there is also the spiritual explanation, and that's what I think we as Christians, of course, want to carry on the day. The answers there are by far the more important ones. I'm going to pick up here an explanation, a little argument that I've heard recently from a guy that I've come to really admire. His name is John Lennox. And so the question is being asked in this one, why does the water come to boil? Okay, now he's a professor at Oxford. He's Scottish, and he's also a theologian. So when he speaks about spiritual things, he does it from a very authentic Scottish accent. But I like to hear him speak because he put this in some very good ways. John Lennox says, okay, I like to go and talk to students and ask them, how does this water come to boil for this tea kettle? And they'll go through the big long explanation. They'll say, oh, well, let's see. There's the water is in liquid form. It turns into steam form, gaseous form. That's the agitation from the heat, which is being conducted by the copper bottom of the kettle. And there's the gas underneath, which the combustion of that gas has releasing the heat, causing all this to happen. There's the engineering of the stove and the piping and all of that. And then John Lennox says, well, the answer I'm going to give you is the following one, and that is that I wanted a cup of tea. That's why the water came to a boil. I wanted a cup of tea. His is the personal, spiritual explanation. And in the end, the only one that really matters in the end, he wanted a cup of tea. Now, the point he makes is, when you look at this physical, material, scientific explanation, and you look at the spiritual, personal explanation, it's not a choice. You don't have to choose one or the other here, do you? They both work. In the end of the day, the one that really matters is going to be the personal one that we see here. I wanted a cup of tea. That's why the water came to a boil. Where did the cosmos come from? We can go back as far as possible in the science and materials explanation, try to come up with something that fits the current model. They think they can go really close to the beginning of what they call the Big Bang, and yet they aren't able to say, well, what about the why did it happen? How did that come to being? They're not able to say that. But we turn to the Bible and we know God did it from his speaking from his voice. That's a spiritual explanation. God did that. If we want to look at a why, perhaps one reason was because he saw it was good. He saw it was good. He liked the light. So in the light and the darkness then, real quickly, from the beginning, what do we see? Light and darkness. We see knowledge, enlightenment, that's light, but ignorance is in the dark, the darkness. Truth, the light of the truth. Falsehood, the cover of darkness. There's righteousness, there is evil. There is salvation in the light. There is condemnation in the dark. That beginning of let there be light out of the darkness is the theme that carries us all the way through to our very own salvation. We must not be children of dark. We are to be children of light, of course. Now, I won't read through these here, but they're the very ones that talk about the light that we're enlightened by God and his word. But I want to move on here as we look at some of these nebula that I've photographed in the past. God is light, and in him there is no darkness at all. God himself is the embodiment of this light. But we go even beyond that, and we see that, here's my Andromeda galaxy again, and there's a Triangulum galaxy, another close neighbor of ours. We see that Jesus is the light of the world. I am the light of the world. He who follows me will not walk in the darkness, but will have the light of life. Light, darkness, all through the Bible, Jesus is the light of the world. So God is the light, Jesus is the light. And then, when we get here to the end of my lesson, we look at some of these beautiful nebula that God has created for us. We see that we are the light of the world. Jesus told us, you are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. We are that light as well. We are not the darkness. We are the light. And then finally, we know that that which begins must end. Again, getting back to the class with the girls, is that if there is a beginning of something, there is an end of something. And in fact, even in the science now, the current idea of the universe is it will not last forever. And there's varying degrees of theories, but it is not static. It changes. Things are created and things are destroyed. For example, here's this picture I have that I finished recently, just June of this year, which is of M101, the Pinwheel Galaxy. It just so happened that I was imaging this back in June. Actually, it was the very end of May, that there was a supernova, a very major supernova in this distant galaxy. Now, it's actually a close neighbor of ours. It's a fairly large galaxy. If I were to put the full moon on this picture, it would actually be several full moons in size. It's actually a big galaxy. But you can't see it very well. Now, I'll point to it with my pointer here, but I'll show you a picture in just a second. This was so cool to see. Oh, I just burned a hole in my sweater. Here is a star. Do you see that star there? If you can see it. These stars you see out here are stars in the Milky Way galaxy. They're closer to us. We're looking through the Milky Way, far away at another galaxy. However, this one suddenly appeared. In fact, I had the good fortune to be photographing it before it appeared and after it appeared. And that is like for an amateur astronomer, I don't know what's it. Well, it's probably analogous to a rock star getting to be on the cover of the Rolling Stone magazine or something like that. I don't know. I can't think of a good analogy. That's a stupid one, but anyway. Here we have this death. That which begins must end, and that this was the death of a star. Here on the right side is the supernova. This shows you just how bright it is compared. This is not a star in our galaxy. It's in that galaxy. And then here is a little dot. I caught it when it was going through its rapid brightening phase. Still pretty dim here. And then a couple of days before, there is no star there. It's not there. It happened. There was a guy in Japan that was the one that first noticed it. And then afterwards, I went back to look at my picture because I'd been photographing it. And I realized, wow, if I'd been more attentive, I would have been in the news. I would have been the guy. But of course, I wasn't. And I think there were clouds in between those nights. But anyway, it's really cool. The idea is then that all things must come to an end, including the universe. This star died. It's forming now a nebula, which someday will be probably very much like that Orion nebula I showed you earlier. It's going to be something different. It's dying. We turn to the scripture. Jesus said, heaven and earth will pass away. Will pass away, but my words will not pass away. It's that word again, the power of creation, the power of salvation does not pass away. It is eternal. We are eternal. The material parts of us, they will die, they will pass away. The spiritual, that will continue just as God's words do. And so finally, in conclusion, here's the last picture to think of. Light in the darkness. I like this shot because I was playing around with a new telescope. It's a wide field of view. And so I knew the galaxy would be real tiny in this picture. This is a real wide field of view, probably several degrees wide in the sky. But I got this galaxy. We see that there's darkness here all over the place, punctuated by brilliant light of stars, and even further away, punctuated by the brilliant light of that galaxy, showing us the fingerprint of God in that canopy of the tent of the night sky. And I like this because I wasn't doing this to photograph the darkness. This wasn't my reason. I think I'll take pictures of things that are totally black. Now, I'm not going to do that. I'm taking pictures of things in the night sky that I can pull out with my camera to make brilliant, to make wonderful. So what do? We live in a universe, a world of darkness and sin, and yet it's punctuated with brilliant light and beauty. God spoke that light into existence. He is the embodiment of that light. God's word has the power to create, to uplift, and to save. Jesus is the light that came into the world in flesh for us. And that in Ephesians 5, walk as children of light. Well, I hope that you have enjoyed that lesson. It was a lot of fun to put together. I think I held it actually at about 35 minutes, like I was promised to do. And now I think we need to, of course, extend the invitation. It is the Word of God is the direct revelation from God. He has told us, not through looking through science, not through looking through a telescope. I can tell you some of the wonders of God's creation. I won't know a thing about what God wants me to do, though, unless He tells me, and He did tell me, He told you through His Word. If there's anyone here who wishes to respond to the gospel, please come forward as we stand and sing this closing hymn. Thank you.